Kartik, what is your thoughts at this stage on how there are 2-3 different back of the envelope calculations going around? Clearly, Mr. Raghuram Rajan's comments can't be taken, as gospel of truth as to that's the only reality. There's so many more factors going into even how you do a back of the envelope calculation.
So, Krishna, I think he's taken that safe territory of 6% growth rate, right?
Okay.
There are going to be years that we will achieve a higher than 6% growth rate, and that is something that we have already seen. Hopefully, in this financial year, we will be growing faster than 6%,
right.
Perhaps a 7% like the RBI has projected. There should come a time in the next 23-24 years where for a sustained period of time we are able to hit double-digit growth as well.
Okay.
Now, look at it in the context of China plus one, the growing mistrust, distrust on China,
right.
and hopefully some manufacturing, including some very critical manufacturing of semiconductors moving to India. Will India get that manufacturing advantage and go faster for a few years? India should. But
it's
can
already
we in
happening.
20 years,
yeah.
You're right, but can we in the next 20 years, 25 years, rule out a few more, at least a couple of more black swan events like we've seen, either a global meltdown which has a direct impact on India, or perhaps, another COVID-like, pandemic-like situation where growth across the world stumbles. So an average of 6% growth, I think, in the given sort of foreseeable, understandable geopolitical arena seems like a safe, yet I would say a very normalized, very a natural growth rate, not overly positive, not negative. So I think 6% seems like a good number to go with.
All right, and with that 6% number, Sujan says that we will still end up being an upper middle income economy by 2047. It's just that you've used the same percentage figures, but your outcomes are different, isn't it, Sujan?
So I think, Sujan, are you looking at inflation numbers, a little more optimistically? Is your calculation suggesting that inflation may not be discounted at, let's say, 6%, 7%, and India's inflation is going to be perhaps, lower single digits, 2%, 1%, like the developed world, and hence the impact on growth is going to be far more pronounced when it comes to per capita income?
I'm telling the calculation is simple. I'm not taking inflation, I'm taking a real growth rate. So if you put the real growth rate closer to 7%, and population growth of 1.1%, that means per capita real growth will be about 5.9%. So closer to 6%. Even if you conservatively take 6.5% GDP growth from this point onwards, and population growth of 1.1%, then also you are talking about a 5.4% per capita income growth. Remember, between 2001 to 2015, China's US dollar GDP was growing at 16.6%. India's US dollar GDP was growing at 9.9%. So even if we don't say what China did during that period, we just do what India did in that period, then 9.9% dollar GDP growth, and again at that time the population growth would have been 1.3%. So in dollar terms, our per capita income was growing 9.9% minus 1.3, which is about 8.6% kind of a growth. So there is no reason why we can't do that going forward also. Right. And in that case, as I said, we will be a higher middle income country by 2040.
Mitali, would you concur with that? Clearly, he is not concurring with Mr. Raghuram Rajan and his hypothesis of where India's income levels are going to be, and he's, predating it, saying that we will become an upper middle income economy by 2040. Your take?
So thanks a lot. So I haven't looked at either of those, calculations. So I won't say which one makes sense or not. But at this point, of course, the 2040 numbers make sense to me on your show. But of course, I would have to study them in order to take an expert, point. But I want to just change this conversation away from these numbers. Whatever numbers we have, whether we achieve by 2040, 2042, 2045, who do we want to be as a country? What kind of middle income country do we want to be? Do we want to be a country where, we have the benefits of growth that are widespread? Or do we want to see the kind of income inequality that we are, currently seeing? And I think this is going to be the crux of where we end up and how soon we achieve middle income status. Because if we focus on growth decentralization, if we focus on climate resilience, if we focus on bringing women into the labor force, if we focus on, broad basing our growth, rather than saying, okay, let's just grow these 2-3, urban agglomerations that are growing very fast, that is when we will get even faster growth. I'm saying that if we bring in policies to, ignite growth in our tier 3, tier 4 cities, if we invest in the infrastructure development of our cities and make them newer and newer engines of growth which are climate resilient, then we can even achieve, nothing stops us from achieving even an 8%, 8.5% or 9% growth, so that we can even accelerate the process. So it depends on what kind of policy choices we make and what kind of path we take as a country. And that's what we are always trying to advise the government to say, let's take a more inclusive path, and they are always open to that. They are always open to taking, more and more inclusive growth-oriented decisions.
All right, that was Mitali Nikore. Mitali, fantastic point over there. Growth is all fine, but what kind of growth is what we need to define, even as we want to grow with those numbers. Sujan, I'm going to come to you for a last quick take. Tell us from your perspective, there's talk of demographic dividend. We already seem to be losing that demographic advantage, especially in the southern states, where the population birth rates are lower than the population growth is degrowing, to be specific. In that sense, how much of a problem will this be that one part of the country has population growing as if nothing stopped it, and one part of the country which has population that's not growing?
It's always possible that kind of divergent trend will continue. But if we talk of India as a whole, at least for the next 15 to 20 years, we are going to have the demographic dividend. One point I want to specifically mention, that when we talk about dollar GDP, what we don't realize that we are not doing it in terms of the purchasing power of the money which it can buy. At India's currently the PPP multiple is 3.5. So if you are talking about our $2,500, the purchasing power of this $2,500 is in actual PPP dollar terms, that is three and a half times larger. And that in itself, see, today a $4,000 country is a that's the upper limit of the lower middle income. So if you just use the multiple of PPP, we are already a upper middle income country by per capita income right now.
News9 Plus. Download now.